So, how nice is it to be on the other side of the desk as it is? If you know me, I don't mind a little bit of role reversal. So when I asked these guys to come back and talk about podcasts again this year, they were always like, oh, you know, it's already been done. So they suggested that I interview the interviewers. So look, podcasts are sort of pretty much new, I think, to a lot of Australians, especially in the aesthetic industry. But these guys were one of the first to start a podcast in Australia, and probably now has the largest audience, I think. But interestingly, 37% of Australians listen to a podcast in the last month, which is up from 25% in 2020. So that's a large jump, right? But I find this really interesting. Weekly podcast listeners in Australia number 5.6 million. And every one of those 5.6 million on average listens to 5 podcasts a week. I mean, to me, that's just mind-blowing. Why aren't we all just doing it? And I think maybe, you know, COVID has had something to do with it. But today we're going to learn from these guys how they first started on their journey and tips that they've got, because all of us can have a podcast. That's what's so great about podcasting. So guys, tell me, how did you decide to get into this? What made you to start it? And
is this on? It is. Perfect. So how did it all start? I was sitting in my office one day, minding my own business. And
unusual.
Yeah, Jake knocked on my door, came in and said, hey, I've got this idea to do a podcast. We spoke a lot about my obsession with various podcasts. And I think you said there's nothing that's being done in the aesthetic space. So you came up with the idea of putting something together, and you asked if I wanted to come on and be a guest and talk about business. And then
5 minutes later, I realized, you know, David and I have got very different skill sets, and, you know, he's a clinic owner. He's built businesses. He's been in the industry a long, long time. And obviously I come from the medical aspect. So I thought, well, we've got a bit of synergy here, a bit of yin and yang sort of skill set. So yeah, 5 minutes later, I said, actually, do you want to be a co-host? And he's like, yeah, all right then, fair enough. And that's literally how it was born.
So the answer is long planning. You know, they talked about it for ages. They did a business plan. Everything was great.
Flow charts, business plans. Yeah.
No, but for me, I think what the most interesting thing, because obviously it's changed over the years that you've been doing it. How did you originally decide, well, A, who your target audience was, and who you would have, you know, as a guest?
Well, you just touched the nail on the head. We didn't really plan it. So
really?
You know, yeah. So initially, you know, I don't know, put your hand up if you've listened to the podcast, at least one. It would just, oh, wow. Okay.
Put your hand up if you listened to the one that I was on. Okay, that's your homework, all right?
So, you know, I think we deliberately started quite diverse. We weren't entirely sure of, you know, who our core listener was. There was quite a lot of wellness, diversity, nutrition, a lot of surgical topics as well. And so we were trying to cater for patients and consumers as well. But, you know, since then things have evolved. And I think COVID for us was a bit of a tipping point where we realized, well, first of all, we can't get some of the guests on that we might have targeted before, but who are we actually, you know, talking to? Who's our listener? So,
yeah. Well, I mean, for me, I just enjoy having conversations with people. Sometimes I forget that we're actually recording. You know, it's actually a really awesome opportunity to talk to thought leaders, key opinion leaders, people that are pioneering new technologies and new treatments. And so quite often I'll be sitting there and completely oblivious that it's being recorded.
That's right. When we had that, it was like an hour talking with friends. And to me, the skill of it was that you two asked the pertinent questions, right? And so for me, it's all about, I mean, do you have to do a lot of homework? How do you do research? What's the story there?
We joke about this a lot. So David's skill set is he's very calm, pretty laid back, doesn't get too involved in the detail. I'm the nutcase who's up at 3. I was emailing Bill today with something for our talk today at 5:30 in the morning. So I'm very detail oriented, and sometimes that can get clouded with the focus of what we're actually doing. So I think we bounce off each other. And
it's great.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we disagree on basically everything. It's funny, you know, people say, you know, you guys speak so well together. It looks like you've got a great relationship. If only they could see the WhatsApp messages between us, the
it's like
arguments.
A perfect marriage. That's what I think.
It's true. You know, joking aside, you know, if you're in a relationship and it's perfect and you never argue, you never struggle, that's not normal. I think some passion involves a little bit of an argument or a bit of a thrashing out of what are we doing here. And we've had a couple of those things, particularly over the second lockdown, where you guys who have listened, we've slightly tweaked our offering. So we did a big survey on our listeners, and got a couple of hundred responses, which was quite representative from all the countries. And we said, what didn't hit the mark? What didn't you like? What was your best episode, and so on. So we sort of tweaked our offering, and obviously we've realized that a lot of our listeners are nurse injectors or injectors. So there's a lot more focus now on injectables and core aesthetics, and less wellness. I'm not saying we'll never come back to those topics. There's always that look good, feel good, dynamic. You can't look good without feeling good, and vice versa.
Well, I guess from your experience then, because really it's within everybody's ability to start their own podcast. We'd like to give them something, some things that they can take away today. So in your opinion, what are the key elements of a successful podcast from your research?
Oh, I think I like the co-host idea. Doing it on your own can be a bit daunting. You can be, depending on your guest too. You've had people before that you ask them a question, you get a one-word response. And, that makes it difficult. So quite often I'll be sitting there and I'm thinking, gee, I don't have another question. Jake, I'll look at him and I'll know straight away that he's got one lined up, or vice versa. So I think the co-host thing works really well. Just different personalities, adds another dynamic to the conversation. Have conversations with people that you want to have, covered topics that interest you. And I think that if you are genuinely interested and engaged with the people that you're talking to and the topics that you're covering, it comes through as genuine. Like, we don't talk to people that we don't want to. It has to interest us. It has to be what we think is going to be interesting to us. Yeah. And then I think that, we didn't target specific people within this industry. I think that people found the podcast and it resonated with them. So I think if you try and create something you think people will want, it can sometimes come across as a bit disingenuous. So I think follow what you like doing.
Yeah, I agree. And, a little bit of engagement with your listener to get feedback. Look at obviously your statistics. I think it's got a lot better in the last 2 years. I think we were here last year saying that it's quite difficult to get some of your statistics, but we've got a reasonable amount of data. So we sort of know, what sex is listening, what town, what city, what country, how many downloads per episode, and, when are they downloaded? So you can see the peaks and the troughs of, when people are interested.
Well, it is sort of the next step, isn't it, from social media? And I think we all, when we post, even if it's just on our own Insta or our Facebooks, when you post something that's a touch point and you're going to get comments or you're going to get it. So are there certain things that you would say appeals to everybody that, if you were starting a podcast, you could work around that?
Yeah, our biggest ever download episode was actually on vaccines with an expert in vaccine technology.
Quite timely.
Yeah, so we don't try and be too clickbaity. We're not going to chase every trend and sort of, jump on what that is. It can be a little bit sort of tacky, but everyone was talking about vaccines. Everyone needed that information, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. So, that was kind of a logical thing to do, even though it went a little bit off piste with what we're all about. But I think our listeners, they're more and more engaging. They're sending us DMs. They're telling us that was great, that was not so sure, and and you sort of tweak things as you go.
I was going to say, I think that we live in a world where everything's curated. You go to Instagram, people are putting filters, they're taking 1,000 photos, selecting the best one that makes them look great. They're looking at every word they put up, but it's very hard to fake an hour conversation. Yeah. It's very hard to, and I think that people feel that it's real. I think that that's what we all are searching for, is that genuineness. And I think that long form discussions give us the ability to really get to know the person, to understand the topic, to listen to it in your own time. You're going to play it back and go over something again. So I think that it does offer something different to traditional social media platforms.
Well, I think that's true. And I think just out of interest, is there anybody in the audience that has never listened to a podcast? Put your hand down. You should at least be embarrassed about that. So, even that's sort of mind-blowing, isn't it? That every single person here has. Can I just ask, has anybody here thought about starting their own podcast?
Be honest. That's awesome.
So, it is awesome. And I guess for me, maybe even just as a takeaway, what would you say the top 5 things that you could give advice to someone starting it? Because I know when we were talking on the podcast, I was like, wow, look at all this equipment. You know, I was thinking you were just going to do it on your iPhone. You know? So what sort of advice would you give to people?
Well, first of all, please do it, because I think, you know, the perception is that we don't want competition, but I think it would be amazing. The more diversity
it's not really
you
competition, isn't it? I think it's
exactly.
just making people more aware of it.
Exactly. So we fully encourage it. But planning, don't do what we did and just sort of hit record and you know, sort of
hope for the best.
Hope for the best, exactly. So find a niche. I mean, of course, it could still be within aesthetics, but really try and target like a sub niche, because even though you might not get thousands of downloads, they're going to be your committed, passionate, you know, listeners. They're going to turn up every
if you're
Friday
a dermal
for
therapist, you could do skin. Or
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Exactly.
that's interesting. Yeah. Anything else?
Get an understanding of all the back end things that need to be done. So, I mean, the conversations are the easy part, to be honest with you. And I think we've had like nearly 170 of them now. It's getting close to that. And it does get easier over time, but I think all the stuff that needs to go on in the background, like the planning, sometimes now we're having pre-meetings with guests because we want to make sure that they're in a room that's not going to make them sound like they're, you know, it's echoing everywhere, that they've got decent lighting, because we've just got, well, we can talk about the YouTube channel. All the back end in terms of editing, making sure that you're getting the sound quality great. I think that when you're having discussions and you're asking people to sit down and listen and commit to an hour and a half, invest in some good equipment. You know, don't use your phone. Spend a bit. Yeah, I mean, you can use your phone to get started, but I mean, if you want people to be listening, I think it needs to be an enjoyable experience for them. So investing in equipment, get a sound engineer if you can for editing. There's no way. I mean, I've kind of worked out how to work our equipment, but every now and again something goes wrong and we'll pick up the phone. Andy, shit, help us, that something's gone wrong. So I think having a good support team around you as well.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, you know, we had our first staff member this year. So
Yeah.
Marla, if she's here or not, she was here last night. So, you know, David's taught me a lesson just working through business and injecting. If you're not good at something, be it admin or tax or whatever, get those people to help you. Don't pretend that you're an expert at everything.
Well, I guess
one other thing, consistency. Because
In
a lot of
everything.
people start with a lot of enthusiasm. This is great, we're going to do it. And then they knock out 4 or 5 episodes. And then it's like, oh, we'll do one in 2 weeks, or we'll do it in 3 weeks. So I think it's about having something that you're putting out on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think this Christmas we had 4 weeks off, but that was the first break we've had in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I think if you turn up for your listener, they know what to expect. They become more and more engaged in your brand and what you're doing. And yeah.
Well, this is a very basic question from someone who does not have a podcast. So you do a podcast, where do you put it?
That's my job.
Like, you know, do you go to Spotify? Do you have to do a contract with it? You know, or you have someone that does it for you?
So what you need is called a hosting site. So we use one called Libsyn. It's effectively, doesn't look very nice, but you write all of your text. So what you see on Apple Podcasts is written in there. You do all your links and so on, episode number, then you choose where you want that to be distributed to. So of course, the more you have, the better. The big ones by far are Apple Podcasts. About 70% of podcasts are consumed through that platform, and Spotify at least 20%. Interestingly, I have heard recently that TikTok might be jumping on that bandwagon. So you might see us popping up on TikTok soon. I did open an account yesterday.
Well, that was my last question. I was going to ask if there's anything exciting happening. But what I thought is, just while we've got a few minutes, are you okay if I just open it up if anyone's got any questions for them? Because we're a bit pushed for time and I'd like to see, does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask the guys? Yes, Dr. Pamakelis.
David's the business finance manager, so you can take that one.
Look, we didn't start the podcast with the aim of actually making money. We just wanted to do something that we like doing, and it grew organically. So we do have companies approaching us that want to come on and have a discussion around a piece of technology or a device that they have. And we're pretty selective about who we want to work with. We have to believe in it. It has to work. It has to be credible. But we're starting to look at that at the moment, to be honest with you. So there's opportunities to do ad reads and working with brands that, I guess, complement the topic that we're covering, but it's not something we've sort of put our heart and soul into yet. For us, it's just been about having the conversations, getting the content out there and building the audience, but we are now starting to move to that point where we could monetize. and we're going to be discussing the launch of our YouTube channel, and that probably has some opportunities there as well. But there are, if you've got the audience, there are plenty of ways to monetize things, but it wasn't our primary focus.
Yeah, and just to add that, I mean, it's a common question. People ask, you guys doing a lot of work. What's the point? Where's the money coming from? I think if you start with the objective of trying to make money, that's not really going to help the focus, because then you're constantly chasing topics and guests that may not resonate with your actual listener. So we've just tried to be as, non-financially sort of driven as possible, and let that come after.
Yeah, and potentially money comes in directly just through the people that you meet, the doors that it opens, the opportunities that present themselves. So I think just looking at it as an opportunity to have great conversations and meet interesting people, and all these things come, as a secondary benefit.
Oh, that's great. Anyone else? Okay, over here, behind. Yep.
Well, I mean, I've been in the industry for quite a long time. So Jake's had only just sort of recently immigrated to Australia about, was it 12, 18 months before?
Refugee.
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to have a lot of friends that I could call and say, hey, I've got this idea for a podcast. We have no listeners and no expertise. We really don't know what we're doing at all, but would you do me a favor and come on and have a chat to us? And that's really how it started. So people like Dr. Shahidi, people like Fiona Tark, the guys that started Laser Clinics Australia. So just reaching out to friends that I'd known in the industry for a long time that were happy to do me a favor. And that's really how it got started, to be honest with you. And then once you have a bit of a track record and people know that you're having sensible conversations and it's something worth their time, then it sort of starts to grow itself.
Yeah, I agree. Nothing more to add.
Dr. Malouf, you had a question?
Too much. So we dedicate Wednesday at least mornings. If we've got, say, someone in the UK recording, we'll do Wednesday night. It just doesn't stop, because you've got all the stuff in the back end, like we just discussed, with the planning, the scripting, the chasing guests, constant WhatsApp conversations going on. There's probably 15, 20, for future guests. You can't just plan obviously a week ahead. It's got to be a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks ahead. Social media planning, it just goes on. And then, David sort of does finances, taxes, all the other side of things. So I think each episode, realistically, we said last year 6 hours. I reckon it's closer to 8 or 9 hours per episode.
I'm going to say it's starting to look like a lot of work.
Yeah.
I thought, you just get your iPhone out and you talk. I'm good at talking. I'm not much good at.
And going back to Dr. Tom Palmer-Collis's question, you can't do it for the money. It's got to be the passion first, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. You wouldn't do it for the money if you had to clock up the hours that you put into it initially anyway. So look, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
So I think we've got time for one last question, or else we can wrap it up.
Can I make an announcement? Oh.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Sort of. Yeah. So, well, there's going to be an image flashed up in a second. Oh, there we go. Could you please open your phone cameras and point it at the screen? Hopefully this works.
Yeah, it'd be embarrassing if it doesn't.
Are you all on YouTube? Okay, great. So if you would please subscribe to our new channel.
Wait
hit
a
the
minute,
like
I
button,
said nothing commercial.
hit the bell button so you get new content as it comes out. Yeah, so we've spoken about this for forever. We planned to do this when we first launched, so everyone's subscribing. So what the purpose of the YouTube channel for now, we're just going to replicate small mini clips of the podcast so you can actually see our guests, see the dynamic of what's actually happening. I think that's nice. It's a bit richer for certain people who are more, visually learners, I guess.
Yeah, or don't want to listen to an hour and a half before they figure out it's a topic that they're interested in. So it's a bit of a teaser to be able to work out whether they want to commit to an hour and a half.
Now we're all becoming more used to sort of small bites of information.
Yeah. But what we will do eventually when we actually get some time is actually put some bespoke proper content just that sits on YouTube. So we thought we might sort of play around with smaller, maybe 10, 15 minute little dives into what's maybe more trending that doesn't necessarily need a full podcast, but it's still interesting. We want to cover that.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, guys. I've enjoyed interviewing you.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.